Good evening to those bored enough to watch. In a previous video, I discussed Marvel's Spider-Man and why it was such a brilliant game. I thought that the gameplay was fun, the story was superb among many other things I liked about the game. Of course, I had my issues, but overall, the gameplay was genuinely an amazing experience that I could not recommend more. 2 years later, in 2020, we would receive Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales. A game that is much shorter but seeks to explore Miles' character and his journey into becoming a Spider-Man of his own. This game, in my opinion, is more of the same, with added mechanics with a story that, while enjoyable, has more flaws and is less impactful than what came before it. Still, despite me calling it more of the same, I think that there isn't anything wrong with that. The foundation it expands upon is a brilliant one, and if you liked the previous game, then you'll like this one just as much. So, in this video, I want to talk about what I liked about this game, what I disliked, and everything in between. So, with that said, let's discuss Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales. This game opens with Miles taking a wander around town, running an errand for his mother before getting a text from Peter letting him know that duty calls. All of the prison escapees from the previous game have been captured and are currently being transported back to prison, and the Spider-Men are going to be overseeing this operation. One of the villains from the previous game who helped Doc Ock with his plan in the previous game is also here, and when he begins to break away at his containment chamber, things begin to go downhill very fast. Miles tries to help, but ultimately things are made even worse when his actions inadvertently cause the helicopter to crash, and from within the chamber, Rhino appears. Peter jumps onto his back as he aimlessly runs around, releasing all of the other escapees. So, while Peter is busy dealing with Rhino, Miles is tasked with taking down the other prisoners. This is where we're introduced to the combat, which is something I plan to talk about later, so for now, Miles and Peter eventually swap places, as the former finds himself riding Rhino through the mall whilst the latter tries to clear a path. Unfortunately for them, even ruining Jonah's show before swinging through the streets again, they crash into a flammable gas tank, causing further havoc upon the city. Eventually, Miles decides to do the most pointless backflip on the planet, while Peter is sent flying through a wall and crashes into the side of a truck. In trying to protect Peter, he unleashes a new power, a bioelectricity of some sort, which allows for him to take down Rhino, after of which a man named Simon Krieger introduces himself as the chairman of Roxxon Energy, who lets them know that they'll take care of Rhino from here. Peter and Miles clear out and find themselves sitting atop a roof, as Peter lets Miles know that he won't be around for the next few weeks. See, MJ has work overseas and requested him to be her photographer, and for that reason, Miles will need to be the one overseeing duty alone. The two swear an oath to protect the city as Peter gifts Miles a box. As for what's in it, he'll find out soon enough. So, as Peter takes his leave, Miles swings out into the city he swore to protect. I really liked this opening of the game. It's just as, if not more action-packed akin to the previous game. It really does allow for the player to feel immersed not only into the world, but captivated enough to see where the story will take us next. I also think that this game does a great job in setting the tone of the story and immediately emphasizing what it's about. This is a city still under the influence of Peter, as both Miles and itself have become reliant on him and his duties since the events of the previous game. Now that Peter announces that he won't be around for the next few weeks, Miles is unsure of whether he will be able to wear the large shoes that Peter is leaving him with, and that is what this story is about. If the previous game was about rising above one's challenges, accepting those around you and being greater to stop a greater crisis, then this game is about being yourself and learning to be your own person as opposed to trying to be someone you're not. As we'll soon learn, Miles learns that lesson that he isn't Peter, and that he shouldn't try to be. But alas, I'm getting ahead of myself. Everything from the first game is here and mostly vastly improved, such as the swinging and the beautiful visuals. I think that both games had great visuals, and I think that the PS5 version of this game heavily expands upon it, with seamless loading times and whatnot. I played the PS4 version of the first game without the PS5 upgrade, in which the loading screens weren't something I paid much attention to since they didn't get in the way too much, and since I was on the PS5, they went by pretty quickly. Still, I think that the lack of loading screens in this game for anyone on the PS5 version is still something worth mentioning, as it shows the technical improvement from the previous game to this one with the new and better hardware they used for this game. Miles meets up with Genki, one of his best friends, as he opens the gift that Peter gave to him. This is where we're introduced to the varying suits that can be collected throughout the game, but with that aside, this is only the first half of the gift. At the location of the second, he discovers that Peter had set combat challenges for him at various locations within the city, which is added as things to do as side content. On his way home, Miles is alerted of a break-in happening at the Roxxon Plaza. A video presentation plays of Simon Krieger advertising new form to be a form of clean and safe energy, and Miles is a break-in and goes inside to see what's happening. A gang by the name of the Underground attacks him, in which after taking them all down, Miles discovers that they were trying to find new form shipments, though he's still yet to figure out what they want to do with it. When he's done fighting, he decides to investigate this further another time, as he needs to go home. When he gets there, he's told that a guest was invited for the upcoming Christmas dinner that they're about to have, and so he prepares their apartment. Eventually, their guest arrives, revealing herself to be Phin, an old friend of Miles. It's apparently been months since they last saw each other, and when the introductions are done, the power in the building cuts out. Miles journeys out and turns it back on with a little help from his newfound powers, and when he gets back, they all enjoy their dinner. When the laughs and jests are over, Miles and everyone catches up on everything happening in their lives. When Finn's brother, Rick, is brought up, her expression momentarily changes before she changes the conversation topic to Rio's activity since the previous game. She's been campaigning against Roxxon, and the next day, she'll be hosting a rally against them. When the two are alone, Miles asks Phin about her distant expression when Rick was brought up, in which she decides to not talk about it. The two also decide to meet up again tomorrow, and thus be cut to the next day. Miles is awoken by Genki, who tells him about an application he designed for people who want to put requests for any trouble in the city. Almost instantaneously, a request is put through by a man named Aaron Davis, a man who's working at a train station whose work was interrupted by the underground tinkering with the train lines. Miles puts a stop to their antics by taking them down, readjusting the trains back onto the rails and defusing bombs, in which when he goes back to meet with Aaron, he finds out that he already knew that the man behind the mask was Miles, and so promising not to tell his mother, the two depart. After a bit of wondering, the time eventually comes for Miles to meet with Phin, and so atop a rooftop, the two find an old time capsule they hid when they were younger, remembering the time they spent with Rick during a time where he had just been offered a job to lead Roxxon's energy group, in which while he goes to take a phone call from them, Miles and Phin hide an energy converter they had worked on as a science project inside the capsule. Cutting back to the present day, Miles once again notices Phin's expression when Rick is mentioned and inquires into it. She dodges the question and mentions that she ought to get going. With that, Miles goes home to attend the rally that his mother is hosting. During as such, he can interact with people such as Aaron and a multitude of others we've met throughout the game thus far. Alongside Genki, he watches somberly as his mother gives a speech about Roxxon. The last time they did a conference, he lost someone important to him, though Genki assures him that all will be fine. Though all seems to plunge into chaos when a mysterious figure later introduced as the Tinker reveals herself and hijacks the rally, mentioning that Simon Krieger is a killer and that they intend to destroy the Roxxon Plaza. The Underground appear, and so as Genki leaves to aid Rio in leaving safely, Miles returns in his suit to fight off the Underground's members. An explosion occurs at the bridge which causes Miles to go and investigate it. When he gets there, he stops Roxxon and the Underground from shooting each other, before the Tinker arrives and steals a compartment containing new form. In his attempt to prevent this, Miles tries to use Venom, which not only reveals that Phin is the Tinkerer, but he also ends up destabilizing the new form, as he's knocked into a truck containing a multitude of similar containers. The bridge explodes from the continuous destabilization, so, as Phin makes her escape, Miles is left to fight the Underground once again. After he's done with that, the bridge begins to fall, and with people still on it, Miles makes a swift effort to save them all, holding the bridge together and saving people from falling among a multitude of other heroic efforts. With everyone saved, Roxxon arrives and tries to shoot Miles, and with nowhere to run, he turns invisible, revealing a new power of his, camouflage, which he uses to get away from Roxxon's security. It's here that I want to talk about the combat of this game, as while it's mostly the same as the previous game, there are a lot of noteworthy additions. The two new additions are Venom and Camouflage. I think that both are great additions to the game and contribute greatly to distinguishing Peter and Miles, as it seeks to establish that they have their own powers and respective abilities. Venom adds a lot more depth to the combat as it gives you more incentive to build up your combo meter, as well as more strategic freedom in whether you want to use it to heal or use Venom. Venom punches do more damage and stun enemies, allowing for you to perform more combos and do more damage in situations such as boss fights, as seen with Rhino earlier. Camouflage allows the player to quickly get themselves out of situations which turned sour during combat, such as being overwhelmed and needing to get away before you can be shot. Using Camouflage allows you to get away and come back either when you've healed or use the getaway for a new approach to a situation. In general, I really like these additions, as it expands upon the previous game, which makes it fun and engaging to play, with a bigger emphasis on strategically thinking out situations while still maintaining the sense of adrenaline that's evoked from the combat. One thing I should talk about is the stealth, which while somewhat addressed through the addition of Camouflage, granted that you can use it for such a purpose, it still doesn't incentivize you to use it at all. I appreciate that it's there as an option, but when in situations where I can just jump in and use what I feel is a more fun approach to confronting enemies, why would I want to use stealth at all? It's even less incentivized here than it was in the previous game, as at least in the first title, stealth was mandatory during MJ's sections of the game. Cutting to the next day, Miles is listening as Simon Krieger blames the events of the previous night on his actions. His mother walks in and announces that regardless of what happened, she'll continue to fight for the betterment of her home, despite Miles' attempts to talk her out of it. Genki then tells him that he needs to stop trying to be like Peter and approaching situations in the exact way that he would, and he needs to start fixing things his own way. So, in a moment of inspiration, we watch a montage as the two design a new suit and as Miles takes the steps into becoming his own Spider-Man. So, in his new suit, he swings out into New York. Miles eventually decides to go to a now abandoned workshop that belongs to Rick and Phin in hopes that he'll find something related to the underground. And so when he gets there, he finds a hidden room and within he finds a video of Rick and Phin discussing Nuform, and how it's actually a hazard to the public as it made Rick sick during its creation. So, the two planned on destroying any records of it inside the Roxxon headquarters, as without Rick's extensive knowledge into the specifics of Nuform, it can't continue development. Another video then plays. Phin is alone in this one, appearing to be in a panicked state as she alludes to something disastrous happening to Rick. Miles decides to break into the Roxxon headquarters when he tracks the phone they used to record these videos in hopes of finding out more information about what truly happened that night, and why Phin became the Tinkerer. He swings back out into the city, unaware of an individual watching from the shadows. Inside of the Roxxon headquarters, Miles runs into this individual, of whom reveals himself to be Aaron. He was the Prowler, and he's come out of retirement with the news of Miles being Spider-Man. He decides to help Miles recover the phone, strictly telling him not to get caught. As mentioned earlier, there really is no consequence for getting spotted by the guards, as regardless of what happens, things continue all the same. Miles eventually reaches the Nuform reactor and finds the phone, finding a video within which shows Phin and Rick trying to stop it themselves. However, their efforts are intercepted by Simon Krieger, as he uses the reactor to kill Rick, as even in the midst of a hopeless situation, he died trying to stop it. Phin was left in tears to get out of there, losing the phone in the process. In the present, Miles decides to stop the reactor himself, and so he does just that. During his attempts to contain the energy, the phone is destroyed, as he's left to fight his way out of the headquarters empty-handed. Atop a moving train, Aaron advises Miles to use Phin and lie his way into the underground to find out more information from there, as he then alludes to what happened between himself and Miles' father, and how him revealing that he was the Prowler estranged him from his family. Miles decides to meet with Phin, as he reveals that he's aware of her role as the Tinkerer and asks to join the underground. He convinces her, and so the two find themselves at the Fisk Tower, where Miles passes a test to show his fearlessness. Once inside the building, Miles decides to see if he can find the Nuform within. Lying to Phin and telling her that he needs to leave, he comes back with his suit and thus fights through the underground during their training session, and finds out that they transported the Nuform to another location. So, after a close encounter with the Tinkerer, he soon gets discovered by another member of the underground and is left to fight against them, in which after that he finds himself at the theatre, the location of the Nuform. He discovers what she plans to do with it, that being to blow up the Roxxon Plaza, in which he decides to oppose that notion as it would cause a multitude of casualties, since she'd be imploding a building in a crowded area with civilians living within. During his attempts at taking the Nuform, he's stopped by Phin, who takes it herself as the two embark on a chase through the city. Eventually, Miles is caught in a trap where she ends up attacking him, and with a blade to his throat, he reveals his identity. The police from below interrupt what would have been a discussion between the two, but when Miles turns to face Phin after noticing them, she appears to have disappeared. In order to take his mind off things, Miles meets with Aaron, who gives a lecture about work-life balance as he gives a project to Miles that himself and his father started during their youth, though they never finished as their relationship soured. If Miles were to finish this project, Aaron promises to tell what happened between the two and why things turned out the way they did. After taking his mind off work for a bit, Miles decides that he needs to talk to Phin and try to talk her out of her current antics. So, as he leaves, Aaron picks up a call and gives whoever is on the other line the location he plans to meet her in. The next day, Miles calls Phin and the two meet at a church, in which, after the two make it clear that they plan on upholding the promises they made to protect the city and to take down Roxxon respectively, they make small talk before ultimately they're attacked by Roxxon. Miles awakes before Simon Krieger, who vows to get the mask off Miles and find out more about how his bioelectricity works, as he's solely interested in making a profit using those abilities. He also plans to use this as an opportunity to get Phin to reveal the location of the Nuform. So, with that, he leaves with Rhino to go to the gym. Wait, why does he need Rhino with him? After Miles takes out the guard from releasing Venom, himself and Phin begin trying to make their way out of this facility. During their escape, Miles discovers that Aaron was working with Roxxon and revealed the location he'd be meeting Phin. There was was supposed to take Phin and leave Miles be, but Krieger went against that. Telling Phin this, she begins to think that Miles is the reason they've both been kidnapped. I have my issues with Phin as a character that I'll be sure to get into in due course. For now, as the two make their way out of this facility, I want to take this moment to talk about how brilliantly Simon Krieger is written. He really is supposed to be hated by the player. He's cocky, charismatic, but firm and assertive in his ideals. He's the type of villain that the game makes you hate, but also makes you grin whenever he's on screen. His jokes and sarcasm whenever he's on screen is really something captivating, and I really appreciated his writing in this game. Before the two move any further, Phin asks Miles whether he had ever thought about calling her to tell her about who he truly was, opening up about how she saw him as a brother after her parents died and Rick assumed the role of a father to her. Before he can say anything, Roxxon guards disrupt them, and so after taking them down and moving further towards the exit, Miles finds out about Krieger's records and alludes to how they can be used to expose Roxxon without needing to blow up the plaza. Before anything can be done though, Rhino confronts them, and so the two fight against him and an influx of guards. After taking them all down, Miles leaves Phin to watch Rhino, in which he discovers that Krieger changed the Nuform reactor in the plaza to blow up the entire city if Phin were to proceed with her plan. Meanwhile, she's with Rhino, of whom begins taunting her with the death of Rick and blaming her for what happened that day. This annoys Phin, angering her as she tries to kill Rhino before Miles stops what he's doing in order to prevent her from doing so. This leads to a beatdown, and as Phin walks away, Miles calls Ganke for help. Back at his apartment, Ganke leaves an injured Miles to go and get treatment, in which he's then discovered by his mother, of whom finds out about his identity. The two then discuss everything that's just been revealed, as Miles vents his frustrations with himself as he feels as though he keeps making things worse in Peter's absence, fearing that he's now putting his relationship with his mother in jeopardy now as well. She declares otherwise, as he quotes the same thing that his father said in the first game, that he's just a guy who doesn't give up. Ganke arrives, as himself and Rio are going to evacuate the city with everything that Phin is about to do, as well as due to a snowstorm that is about to lay waste to their city, they plan to get somewhere safe. Meanwhile, Miles intends to go and find where the Nuform is in an attempt to stop Phin and her plan. It's here that I want to talk about one of my many issues with this game, that being the writing. In my opinion, I think that this game has a well-told story, but with it being a much shorter game, it tries to rush things that worked in the previous game, which causes it to fall flat. For example, leading up to the reveal in the first game that Doc Ock was the final boss, we as the player got to experience that transformation into the person he became, who he was prior to the neural interface overtaking him, who he was during the overtaking before culminating into the person we saw in the finale of that game. We got to experience Octavius in ways that helped the player sympathize and understand his position, making that final scene where Peter walks away from him screaming out his name all the more impactful. He was a good person, but under the influence of the neural interface that himself and Peter were working on, he had let his hatred for Norman Osborn overtake his judgment, and we got to understand and know his character in just about every way, including an extensive showcase into his relationship with Peter. This game tries to do something similar, but in my opinion it falls completely flat as characters such as Phin don't get enough screen time. We know her plight and why she's doing what she's doing, but the game just begs you to hate her, especially in situations where she blames Miles for things such as her thinking that he's the reason for them both being kidnapped, among many other things. The game doesn't have time to fully expand upon her character in the way that the first game could with Doc Ock, as he was someone you spent time with throughout the game. Here, this game tries to rush through all of the important backstory without actually trying to expand and build upon her character, making Phin just fall flat as a character. That's not to say that the game doesn't attempt to during parts of the story, but building on a character is a task way bigger than what two singular flashback scenes are able to accomplish. This is a shorter game, and I appreciate that the game doesn't waste your time with bloating the story, but I do wish it would have expanded more on her character, because at the end of the game, I could understand the sacrifice she makes but not really sympathize with it because she wasn't a character that I liked. If anything, I was more indifferent towards it than anything. To fully close this point, I want to briefly skip ahead and mention that after beating the game, Rio tells Miles not to judge Phin on how she lived or how she died, but to more rather remember her for the person she was and why he loved her. To Miles, that's an important message, teaching him that if a person you once knew takes a bad path in their lives, it's not wrong to remember them for the person you loved as opposed to the person they ended up becoming. To the player though, that message once again falls flat because we don't see enough of their relationship prior to the events of this game. Though I don't mean this to say that all aspects of this game's story are bad, as there were parts of it that I enjoyed that I'll discuss shortly. On his way to the science center, Miles is attacked and held captive by the Prowler. Shocked and angered, he learns that the Prowler wants to keep him there until the conflict between the Tinkerer and Krieger is over. But Miles objects. He doesn't get to choose when he's Spider-Man. People need him and he wants to be there to stop Phin's plan. So he breaks out of the Prowler's cell and thus the two engage in a fight. I want to briefly take this moment to appreciate the writing between Miles and his family. The relationship between himself and his mother, Aaron, and many others is done really well. For example, the Prowler is desperate to stop Miles from throwing himself into situations where he'll get hurt, and while the methods he takes to do so are resented, you can sympathize with the way he feels. Keep in mind, the characters that we're seeing here are the ones that have experienced the death of Miles' father and don't want anyone from their family to end up the same way. Just like his father, Miles is willing to put himself into situations where he could possibly die, and Aaron wants to prevent that, so he keeps him in his vicinity in hopes of keeping an eye on his nephew. Another example of this is Rio's reaction to finding out who Miles is. Her immediate words are that he could have died just like his father did in trying to save everyone from the demons in the previous game. In the end, they're all affected, and outside of a few outright mentions, the effects and paranoia of another one meeting the same fate lingers. Ultimately, I think that one thing that this game does amazingly is writing Miles' relationship with his family, regardless of my issues with its writing of Finn's character. In the end, Aaron sees the error in his ways and begs Miles not to abandon him just like his father did when he found out that he was the Prowler. Miles assures him that he won't, but he can't turn his back on others when they need him. He walks away, and Aaron simply looks on somberly, simply at the reminder of his father and how aspects of his character live on in Miles. Again, there is always the possibility that this is just a big overthink on my end, but with that aside, we approach the penultimate section of the game, one where we're given the chance to do as we please and finish up any side activities before the end of the game. I'll talk more about these after the finale, as I did a lot of the side content after I finished the main game. So, with that, let's begin the finale. At the center, Miles recalls a moment where himself and Phin were younger. Their project, an energy converter, is on display here, and they intend to go and see it. During this section, we can find Peter and Octavius here discussing the neural interface. Keep in mind, this brief flashback section takes place before the events of the first game. But with that aside, we exploit mechanisms in a door's lock and enter the special exhibit, the energy converter they had worked on. Rick finds them, and so they take a picture, which is what Miles is looking at in the present. He finds the new form here, and when he's about to take it, Phin stops him and takes it for herself. Miles is left to deal with the underground while she gets away. During the midst of the snowstorm, the city is falling into chaos. So, before he goes after Phin, Miles stops the fighting between Roxxon and the underground, in which after doing so he finds the citizens, his mother and Genki among them. He struggles to find a way to carry them all to safety before the Prowler arrives, offering to do so in his place as Miles has more important business to attend to, for Phin has already begun to supply the reactor in the Roxxon Plaza with new form. Eventually, the two find themselves inside the headquarters, and this is where the final fight begins. Phin thinks that Miles is lying to her about Krieger having wired the plaza to blow up all of Harlem if it were to go off, despite his continual insistence that he isn't, as she tries to use their mutual love for Rick and their desire for justice in what happened to him to get Miles to finally look the other way. Eventually, Miles finds himself overpowering Phin. However, the building is falling apart as the reactor is about to implode. Taking off his mask so he can see better, Miles jumps down to catch her, and as the two fall, she whispers that she's apologetic for what she's done. Eventually, Miles gets up in hopes to contain the new form by absorbing its energy. It proves to be more of a daunting task than he thought, and reminded of Rick and his demise, Phin rushes to make a noble sacrifice, taking Miles afar and telling him to let go of the energy. This causes an explosion, and Miles is the only one who falls back down, for Phin is dead. Without his mask, some people see who Miles is, and when the press comes in hopes of seeing for themselves, they offer to cover for him, as he puts on his mask and swings away. 4 weeks later, Miles is wandering through the city once again, more confident of his surroundings and well known. Street art not only depicts Peter's Spider-Man but his own now too. So as Peter's back from his vacation, the two talk for a moment, as they both vow to ensure that people like Simon Krieger, of whom has been arrested, can't get away with what he did throughout the game. And so, the two begin to swing into the city, as during his efforts to protect it, Miles not only learnt to be greater, but he also learnt to be himself, thus ending Spider-Man Miles Morales. After beating the game, there are a lot of things that you can do, such as a lot of side content. I personally didn't do all of it, but I did do all of the sampling missions given by Aaron, in which throughout he recalls moments from his youth, and how he spent time with his brother and Rio while also hiding his identity as the Prowler. His relationship with Miles' father was complicated, as he struggled with his life of crime which over time tore him and his brother's goodwill with each other apart. After collecting all of the samples, it's turned into a beat which I won't comment on the quality of, but we're given a new suit by Aaron, in which he then explains that when Miles' father was looking into the Prowler, he was led to Aaron's clients, such as Wilson Fisk and Simon Krieger. Aaron didn't want him to make enemies of that caliber, especially with Miles and Rio in his life that could possibly be endangered by his investigation. So Aaron revealed his identities in hopes that he'll stop, and he did just that. But revealing his identity came at a price. Aaron wasn't allowed anywhere near the Morales family, as Rio and Miles' father didn't want their son to turn out don't like him. It's why throughout the beginning of the game, Rio continually expresses that she doesn't want the two around each other without ever explaining why. But that's just a brief insight into the many different things you can do as side content after beating the game. You can also play New Game Plus, you can also engage in the combat challenges throughout the city, among many other things. Needless to say, while this is a much shorter game, you will be busy with this game for quite some time. With that, I want to move on to the conclusion. Overall, I really liked this game. I have my problems with it, but I also have many things that I enjoyed about it. Despite my issues with the story, there were things that I liked about it that I hope I've made clear throughout this video, such as the relationships between Miles and his family members. The gameplay is more of the same with additions to enhance it further, and as much as I liked those additions, it was more of the same, and I think that's okay. This game was using a brilliant foundation to build upon, and for what it set out to do, I think it did so very well. Unexplored and not expanded enough in some areas, but also brilliantly executed in others. If you liked the first Spider-Man game, you're going to like this one too. So, if you're interested, I would recommend Spider-Man Miles Morales. So, there's the video. I hope you all enjoyed it. I apologize that this video took so long, and I hope that the wait was worth it. If you want to view the list of games I want to make videos about in the future, then you can always do so through the link in the description. Additionally, if you want to follow me, then my socials will be linked in the description, as well as any afterthoughts or messages I may want to add. With that, I haven't really got much else I want to say, so I'll see you all in my next video. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I wish you all a very pleasant